So in this part of the story, Lord Vamandev, Sri Vishnu, has reciprocated with the surrender of Bali Maharaj, and he is not the loser. Bali Maharaj, that is to say, is not the loser, but he has gained everything. That is always the dilemma of a person having to make sacrifices in the name of God. The side of us that is, let's say, materialistic, the side of us that is separate from the center, we feel that if we offer things to the center, to God, then we will become the loser. But it is actually the opposite. If we don't offer, then we become the loser. But if we offer everything to the Supreme Lord, then we gain everything. Most important of which is we gain the satisfaction of heart, the heart that could not be satisfied by anything but communion with the Supreme Lord. So this Bali Maharaj surrendered everything, and he got the Supreme Lord, Vamandev, as his doorkeeper in Sutala. Sutala is one of the, you can say, planetary systems below the Earth disk. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto, they say there are 3 swargas, or 3 heavenly regions. The Divya Swarga is what we normally refer to as heaven. It's a celestial domain. Then there's Bhoma Swarga, the heaven that is on earth, or on the earth plane. That means the other islands, and the central island of Jambudvip, they're called as Bhoma Swarga. And then there are planets beneath the earth disk called as Bila Swarga, or the heaven underneath, or the heaven in the whole, because Bila means whole. So underneath the earth, that is another type of Swarga. So it is not that because they're, in a lower planetary system that it's not wonderful. It's actually in one place in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto also, it says that many of the heavenly regions in Bila Swarga is more than even Divya Swarga, because the demons are very interested in expert and enjoyment. In any case, Bali Maharaj gets to be the ruler of Sutala, one of those heavenly regions below, and he has Upendra or Vamandev as his protector or doorkeeper. And Indra is also restored in his rightful position in Divya Swarga. So everyone is happy, basically. So after this, all the different persons who made witness to Bali Maharaj's surrender, they're in the arena. So they're offering their own personal glorification and appreciation of everything that they've just seen. So it began with Prahlad Maharaj offering his glorification. And then afterwards, Lord Vishnu made us sort of a little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? He made a little bit of a sarcasm, and pointing out to Shukracharya that you have cursed Bali Maharaj for his impotency and his impropriety in the performance of karmic duty. So the Lord Vishnu asked him that please forgive him for his discrepancy in the performance of karma. And this way, the Lord is saying this in a spirit of sarcasm. And in that spirit, or in reply to that spirit of sarcasm, Shukracharya began speaking this verse and the next verse. So this is in direct response to Shukracharya's own impropriety for thinking that in surrendering to Krishna, there was some transgression of proper duty or karma. So this verse is in response to this. So he says here, Kutasta karma vaishamyam. So he says, where is the karmic discrepancy on the part of Bali Maharaj, Tat? So he's had an enlightened moment. He said, where is the discrepancy? Yasya karmeshwaro bhavan yagnesho yagapurusha sarva bhavena pujita. He is worshipped with his everything, sarva bhavena pujita. He is worshipped with his everything. The Lord of Karma, Karma Ishvara. Karma Ishvara means the Lord of Karma. Yagya Ishya. Yagya Isha means the Lord of Yagya. And Yagya Purusha, the personality who is to be pleased by the performance of Yagya, he is called as the Yagya Purusha. So the Lord of Karma, the Lord of the Yagya, and the Lord who is to be satisfied by the performances of Yagya, Sarva Bhavena Pujita. That Lord has been worshipped by Bali Maharaj with his everything. Sarva Bhavena. Prabhupada translated this in all respects. So as you know, if you go to Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, verse number 14 and 15, maybe I should just share these verses. You can see for yourself. But there, Krishna is describing the world of karma. For those souls who are interested in the material enjoyment, then they have to learn how to perform the Vedic yagyas or the yagyas. The word yagya we translate as sacrifice often, and the word yagya means to offer. So when you take something for your own sustenance, you have to offer it back in order for the relationship to remain whole. That is the meaning of the word sacrifice, right? The word sacrifice means to make sacred or to make holy. And the word holy means like to make it whole. So if you have like a whole piece of pie, let's say, I don't know why I like to give a pie image. And if you take a slice, then the pie becomes less. So our relationships are kind of like a pie. And there's a give and take that is there. But if you take and you don't give back, then it remains, you can say, fractured. And problem comes to those relationships when there's fracture. People don't learn how to give back. Then problem occurs in those relationships. So in order for our relationship with one another, our relationship with the environment, our relationship with the animals, etc., in order for those relationships to remain whole, then Vedic scriptures describe the need for the performances of yagyas. So it is yagya, I like to say this, it is yagya that makes the world go round. Sometimes people say it is love that makes the world go round, and that can be true if love is qualified by sacrifice. In fact, what is the meaning of love without sacrifice? So more specifically, Krishna says it is this principle of yagya that keeps things going, the principle of giving back. And that is an absolutely essential principle for governing the maintenance of the relationships in the material world. So as soon as living entities refuse to perform the yagyas, then they experience so many problems in their relationships on all levels. So here Krishna is saying, I'll just read these verses. This is from chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. All living beings subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yagya, and yagya is born of prescribed duties. Okay, where do those duties come from? Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So here, if one performs the yagyas, even without awareness of God, then that God, Krishna is saying here, he is situated in those acts. And that way things remain whole or complete. So that means the whole purpose of these Vedic yagyas, is to please that personality, who resides in those acts of yagya. That personality is the Supreme Lord. So here he's called as Yagya Purusha or Yagya Isha. The Yagya Purusha means a person who is to be pleased by yagya. And Yagnesha means the Lord of the yagya. So if he is satisfied, then the rite is complete. So this Bali Maharaj, Sarva Bhavena Pujita, he has worshipped that personality with his everything. And in doing so, he has certainly satisfied him. So how can there be any discrepancy in the performance of karma? Kutastha karma vaishamyam. That's what he's saying. How can there be any discrepancy in the performance of karma when he has satisfied the personality who is to be pleased by those performances with all of his everything? Sarva Bhavena Pujita. So this gives the you can say that this speaks to the tension that sometimes exists or that we hear about, particularly in Srimad Bhagavatam, between the world of karma and the world of bhakti. So again, when one is without devotion, then he is obliged to perform these Vedic karmas and these Vedic yagyas in order to ensure that the wholeness of all the relationships in the material world are maintained. But it is seen in the cases of bhaktas that sometimes they may appear to transgress those injunctions or not follow them. And so someone who is qualified to be on that path of karma, they find fault with the devotees um, who do not find themselves obliged to such rules and regulations. And there, this tension arises in the hearts of the society if they see that, or in the hearts of individuals when they see that within themselves. This tension comes up. So here, the way it's being reconciled in Prabhupada's purport is that first, it should be clearly understood that what is the purpose of these yagyas. So Prabhupada just made it clear by quoting this verse from the Vishnu Purana that the purpose of these yagyas is to satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu. So he quotes this next verse from the Bhagavatam, which is a very important verse, in tandem with the verse that follows it also, that the whole purpose of this whole Varnashram system, where all the prescriptions of yagya are there, are to please Hari. Samsiddhya Hari Toshanam. That is the purpose of these yagyas, to please Lord Hari. So the verse that comes after this, 1-14, let's go to this verse. It's an open link. You can just see. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Since that is the whole purpose of the Vedic yagyas, Tasma ekana manasa bhagavan sattva-tampati. Shotavya kirtitavyascha dhyaya pujascha nityada. What is the conclusion reached by Sutta Goswami? He says, if the whole purpose of those yagyas and varnashram system is to please Hari, so that Hari is directly pleased by acts of bhakti. So therefore, tasma, therefore is indicating a conclusion being reached by the speaker. Therefore, ekana manasa, with one mind, Bhagavan sattva-tampati, shotavya kirtitavyascha deha pujas cha nityada. With one mind constantly, nityada means constantly, hear, shotavya. Kirtitavyas means to chant or sing. Dheha means to meditate. And pujas means to worship, like in worshiping the deity of Bhagavan. Therefore, you should hear about, sing, meditate, and worship Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord, Sattva-tampati, who is the master or protector of the devotees. So the idea here is that if the whole purpose of this Vedic system is to please Hari, that Hari is directly pleased by bhakti. So therefore, do only bhakti yoga. Ekana manasa means do only this bhakti yoga to please Hari. And that way, the whole purpose of all these other injunctions are thereby satisfied. So you'll find in the Gita also, Krishna says very similar conclusion. Krishna has divided his teachings in the Gita as confidential, more confidential, and most confidential. If you look at verses 1863 through 66, he gives his division of secret, more secret, and most secret knowledge. And the secret and more secret knowledge is contained within the most secret knowledge. So what is that most secret knowledge? Krishna says his most secret knowledge is his paramam vacha, it is his supreme instruction. And what is that? To always think of me, become my devotee. Mamana bhava ma bhakto, mam yaji mam namaskuru, to worship me, to offer obeisances unto me. And then he says his very famous verse, Sarva dharma parit yagya, mame kamsharanam raja, that you should give up all other dharmas. Sarva dharma parit yagya. Parit yagya means completely. So there are so many types of dharmas in the Vedic culture. Varnashram dharma is included within that. So he's saying Sarva dharma parit yagya, give up completely all these dharmas, including Varnashram dharma. And mame kamsharanam raja, and you surrender unto me exclusively. So aham tam sarva papepyo moksha yashami mashuchaha. So Krishna says, any sinful reactions that come, I shall free you from those. I will give the liberation from those. So our acharyas make a comment about this. Sometimes people think, particularly pious people, probably more than not, like from India, they may think of this verse that if you surrender unto Krishna, then he'll free you from the sinful reactions of transgressing your moral obligation to the social system known as Varnashram Dharma. So in other words, you took up bhakti and you gave up some moral obligation to the social world. And in doing so, you've committed a very heinous transgression or impropriety. And there's some sin in that, because the definition of sin for Vedic culture is that you act against your prescribed duty. If anyone does anything against prescribed duty, it is called a sin. That is why in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, don't perform this sin of giving up your prescribed duty at the time of, performing it at the time of the war. So that is a very simple definition of sin for this culture. So you've given up your prescribed duty in favor of doing this bhakti exclusively to Krishna. That is some impropriety. There's some sin there. So you have to be punished for that sin. But Krishna is saying, I will deliver you from that sin. So sometimes people give explanation like this or this particular verse. But our Acharya said this is not the proper understanding of the verse. Because if you're giving up the prescribed duty because you've been instructed to do so, Sarva Dharma Prit Yagya, Mame Kamsharanam Braja. Krishna himself is giving that instruction to give up this Varnashram Dharma and to surrender unto him exclusively. Since he is given that instruction, where is the question of sin? So the idea here is that the statements of the Shastras, they exist on a spectrum, they exist on a spectrum, and the rules that apply to you are the rules that are congruent with the level of consciousness that you're at. So taking this idea a little bit further, when the consciousness is free from certain impositions, then you are free from the injunctions that govern that consciousness that had those impositions imposed upon it. I don't know if that makes sense. I used that word a lot there. So in other words, there's a nice verse in this regard. Atmarama Shamunayo Nagranti Api Harukrame. So the Atmarama means a person who is self-realized. He is Nirgranta. So the word Nirgranta has two meanings. It has many, but two main meanings come out. Nirgranta means without knots. The word granta means a knot. And the word granta also means book. So Nirgranta refers to the knot of false ego. For example, if you have the ego of a Brahmana in this culture, there are a lot of practical knots that would be there. You have a knot in your Sika. Nowadays, people don't always put the knot in the Sika because they like it to flow, I guess. But previously, everyone wears the knot in the Sika, and they're a knot in the dhoti or sari. You have to put a knot so it doesn't fall down. When you get married, they literally tie the knot. They say that here in the West also, but in India, they practically tie it. You can see in the marriage ceremony. So there's so many knots that come just by taking birth in this material world. And they're the knots of false ego, essentially. So the word granta here means the knot of false ego. And it is that ego that creates it's the ego that puts a certain imposition on the awareness. And according to that imposition, you have a certain view of yourself, a certain sense of your own subjectivity, and you have a certain sense of the world outside of you, because that is the purpose of the ego. It creates those parameters. So one thinks I'm a bug, for example, and then you see the world in a particular way according to that imposition. One thinks of oneself as a human, so you see the world according to that particular imposition. Then one sees oneself as a particular race or a particular gender or a particular sexuality or a particular political creed and so on. And according to that way of seeing yourself, you have a way of seeing the world. So these are all impositions of the ahankar, the false ego. So in this way, according to the imposition of ego, the way that you see yourself and the world around you, then there will be so many rules to govern that paradigm of life, if you will. And if you can become free from those impositions, to whatever degree you become free from those impositions, then you're free from the rules that govern that ego or that awareness that's governed by that ego, right? I hope I'm saying that right. So this is the meaning of nirgranta, becoming free from the knot of ego. And it's related to the word nirgranta, which means becoming free from the book. So again, when you have a certain ego, then there are grantas with rules to govern that ego. If you become free from that ego, then you become free from the rules that govern that particular ego. This is the meaning of Nirgranta. So you'll see Atmarama Shamunayo Nirgranta Api Harukrame. So this example of the Atmarama Shukadeva Goswami. So Shukadeva Goswami didn't have any false ego. He didn't even see the difference between man and woman, as it's related in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam. He's walking past these beautiful women and who are bathing, young women, and he's a young boy. And he's not disturbed. They also are not disturbed because they can see. Apparently, ladies have this power to understand the mind of everyone. So be careful, everyone. Be careful, gentlemen. They could see that this fellow just is seeing Brahman. He doesn't even see men and female. So they didn't even bother to cover up when he walked past. When his father, who was just behind him, runs to catch him, they immediately covered up. And Vedavyasa was taken aback by this. He says, this is a young boy, at the prime age, 16, and you did not cover it up. And I am much older. I'm old enough to be your grandfather, maybe even great-grandfather. And you're showing such modesty in front of me. And they said, no, this fellow only sees Brahman. He doesn't even see man and woman. So therefore, there was no need to cover up. No disturbance was there. But you are seeing the difference between man and woman. You're playing as Grihastha. So we have to cover up. So the idea here in sharing this is that Shukadeva Goswami was Nirgranta. So he didn't even have to follow the rules to put on the clothes. Even that's a rule also, govern, at least a rule that plays out in civilized societies, that you cover up. But he was freed even from that. He didn't have the knot in his hair. He didn't have Brahmin's thread, which is also having a knot on it. He had no ego. So then he was free from the grantas that govern those different egos. So coming back to the main point that we're, I guess, picking up here, is that Krishna is saying in the Gita that you surrender unto me. Sarvadharma Parityagya. You give up all of the dharmas and you surrender unto me. So that is a rule also, or you can say an injunction. And if you are able to follow that injunction, then you are freed from the obligation to follow the lower injunctions, which were intended to bring you to the point of surrender to Bhagavan. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Jaiva Dharma, he refers to this as this sort of contrast between what rules need to be followed on what level. He uses this language, udita vivek and anudita vivek. The word udita vivek means enlightened discernment. And anudita vivek means unenlightened discernment. The word vivek means discernment or discrimination. Discernment is a better word. So the people who have awakened discernment and those who don't have awakened discernment, they see the world from two different paradigms, right? As Krishna says in the Gita also, what is that verse? Yanisha sarabhutanam yasam jagrati sanyami tashyam jagrati bhutani sanisha pashutomuni. Krishna says what is night for common man is a time of awakening for the self-control. And the time of awakening for common man is night for the introspective sage. So that means that this sage and this ordinary person, they're awake and asleep to two different realities. They're governed by different paradigms because of because of the imposition or freedom from the imposition of ego. So those who are having various impositions of the ego on them, what are they awake to? Well, they're awake to mostly enjoyment. That is what's one of the main governing principles of that paradigm. I want to enjoy. In order to enjoy, I need to control. In order to control, I need power. That is a basic thread of that paradigm. And this is called anudita vivek. And you realize you have discernment also, but your discernment is in terms of this principle, how to enjoy, how to control, and how to gain the power so I can control. So they're awake to that, always calculating in that term. And they're asleep to their own soul and asleep to the supreme soul. But those who have udita vivek, the awakened awareness, the introspective sage, what is he awake to? Well, he's awake to his own soul and he's awake to God. And that is the governing principle of his existence. And what is he asleep to? Well, he's asleep to the world um, that he's a slave to the world of sensual enjoyment, which is informed by various types of ego concepts. He's asleep to that. Krishna uses a very interesting language there. He says, Sanisha Pashyatomuni. He sees that. So that means that it's not that he has no awareness of that principle or that paradigm, even within his own self, but he remains indifferent to it. So Nisha Pashyatomuni, he sees it. He sees that ego that wants to put itself in the center and displace God from the center. He can see all of that, but he remains indifferent to such an ego. So he's not governed by the same rules that are meant to govern those who have that ego. He's free from that. Sarvadharma Parityagya Mame Kamsharanam Braja. That is the meaning here, according to our acharyas, that when Krishna is giving this instruction to give everything to him, then if you transgress other injunctions, which were only intended to bring you to the point of surrender, it is not considered as an impropriety. There is no discrepancy there. Therefore, you get verses like this in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which are sometimes bewildering. Well, depending on how you think about it, it can be bewildering. But 1.5.17 is quite popular. There are many of these verses. If you study Nectar of Devotion, chapter number 5, I think, which Prabhupada is titled The Purity of Devotional Service. That whole chapter is just a long list of these verses saying that if you have bhakti, then you are free from the obligation to the social world. There are many such verses. This is one such verse that comes up in that passage of verses. Taktva sadharman charanam bhujan hare bhajana pakko ata patet yadi. So if someone gives up his swadharma, right, his obligation to the social world around him, and does bhajan of Hari, charanam bhuja hare bhajan, he does the bhajan of Hari, he does bhakti yoga. But his bhajan is apakwo. Apakwo means it is immature. He is neophyte. And because of being neophyte, his bhajan, his practice of worship will have some problem in it. Maybe, or he'll get attached. Some anartha is there. He'll follow that anartha. And he may actually leave devotional service. Atapatet totoyadi. If he falls from that devotional service, this is the dilemma that's being brought up. So he's left his swadharma to do bhakti, but his bhakti is immature, and he falls away from bhakti also. Yatra kvabhadram abhuda mushikim. So Narada Muni is saying here, which is probably a little bit of an agitating statement for those who are attached to the social world. Prabhupada even says the word va here sarcastically. He says, what is unfavorable? What is the problem? There are no abhadra for him. Abhadra means inauspicious thing. There are no abhadra, nothing unfavorable will happen. Even if he falls away from bhakti, having given up dharma, then there is nothing inauspicious. Kovarta apto abhajatam swadharmataha. But for one who is fixed on his swadharma and he doesn't do bhajan, abhajatam, he doesn't do worship of Hari, then what does that person gain? Nothing. It's just all temporary. This verse itself should be broken down properly, but I'm more or less out of time. So anyway, the whole idea here is that we find that these injunctions of shastras, they exist on a spectrum. And when you qualify yourself for a higher level of practice, and you qualify yourself by expanding your consciousness to come, when there's expansion of the consciousness and it moves closer to the center, there's deeper, more profound communion with the center that is Sri Bhagavan. Then you are free from the obligation of those particular rules. Now, it is the case that a lot of these saintly kings, like Bali Maharaj and so on, it doesn't mean just because you're free from the obligation to those rules that it means you have to transgress them. So we don't want to give any implication of that whatsoever. Or, I'm not trying to imply that. In fact, you'll see that the saintly kings, they always try to live in harmony as far as possible with the social world around them, especially if they were kings, because they have to set an example because everyone's looking at them. But sometimes it is the case that life circumstances, and life is very good at doing this to us. Sometimes life, the order of our life, what comes into the order of our life is this chaotic circumstance, which may oblige us to make a hard decision. And at that time, if one chooses in favor of Krishna, even at the cost of some loss in the social world, then here Bhagavatam is trying to give the confidence that there is no discrepancy there. Although this is a statement of the Shastra subjectively, we may not always experience as such. Subjectively, it may weigh on our hearts very heavily. So Bhagavatam is trying to give confidence by these sorts of ideas here that no, life actually has a real purpose, and the purpose is the pleasure of Krishna. And acting in favor of that principle, maybe we've tried our very best to keep it reconciled with the world around us, but sometimes life obliges a hard decision or decisive decision to be made, something that's very decisive and game changing, so to speak. That happens. At least once or twice, it may happen in a person's life. So at that time, if you make a strong decision, and it could have impact around, the people around you and so on. Just like when I made a hard decision to become a devotee, it had a very big impact initially on my friendships and my relationships with my family. It was, it's heavy. And I'm not the only one that experienced that, I'm sure. But Krishna and these statements of the Shastra wants to give the confidence that we will never become the loser and that there is no discrepancy in doing so because life actually has a real purpose. And that purpose is to come closer and closer to the center, that is Sri Krishna. And Bali Maharaj, of course, certainly did this. Sarvabhavena Pujita. He is worshipped with his everything, that sacred center, which is Bhagavan, who is the Lord of the Yagya. He is the person who is to be pleased by all these Vedic acts. So where is the discrepancy on his part? Kutas tat karma vaishamyam. There is no discrepancy. That's what he wants to say here. There is no problem whatsoever. Okay, so I'll stop there. I usually stop a little earlier to see if anyone wants to ask anything or participate in any way. Thank you all very much. Okay, I see.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Haribo.
This is Rupa Chandra Das.
Hare Krishna.
I'm not sure if I can articulate the question I have in my mind properly, but what comes to my mind is very often bhakti is the internal thing. We practice, our chanting and hearing and other devotional activities, but bhakti is very internal. And at the same time, we are in a social world as well. So can we say that as long as our activities that we perform as devotional service don't contradict with actually the other way around. As long as our activities in the social world don't contradict with our bhakti practices, then one should continue to engage in the social world as an ordinary human, as a normal human being, giving affection to other people, being polite, wishing them the best. Kind of like Raghunath Das Goswami's, the instruction that he got from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu asked them to act as if the way that people expect you to act while cultivating a bhakti internally. I wonder if that's something that you could touch upon.
Yeah, I just maybe a clarification on for me. Something like being nice and kind is not just like a social obligation. Those are nice qualities. And it is said that if you do bhakti, then all such nice qualities should be manifesting, right? So specifically when it says social obligation, it means like the Vedic dharmas and the Vedic yagyas, right? The Naimittika karmas, the Nitya karmas. So these are like specific rules governing specific psychologies that are intended to be followed out. Like if you're a Brahmana, you have these duties. If you're a Kshatriya, you have these duties. If you're a Vaishya, you have those duties and so on. And things like being nice and so on, that comes with like, it should ideally come with just being a human being. It's not, I think in the Bhagavatam, they refer to those sorts of qualities as samanya dharma. It's like general dharma for all humans. which includes bhaktas who are also having human bodies, right? So yeah, to your point, as long as the social obligations don't contradict bhakti, then one may remain in them. Yes, that is my general understanding. The very outside of the Srimad Bhagavatam says karmashin indriya pritir labojiveta yavata. That life isn't meant for sense gratification, so we got that. And one has to engage so far as it's required to keep body and soul together. And then the rest of the time, Bhagavatam says, should be used in investigating the absolute truth. So that's my general understanding of this sort of idea that, yes, we engage as far as required to keep body and soul together. We may say it another way, as far as required to keep body and mind in sanity. Because as humans who may not have yet high level adhikar for just absorption in Bhagavan, then we need some engagement. Otherwise, we actually literally go insane. And I think this lockdown is proving that maybe to ourselves for some of us. And it certainly proved it to me by looking at a lot of things going on. I already know about 2 or 3 suicides in the devotee community that has followed this lockdown, believe it or not. So there needs to be some engagement for just sanity. So you accept some engagement for that sanity. And as long as it does not contradict your practice of worship of Krishna. Contradict means it takes all your time and you can't dedicate any concentrated effort to your bhajan. Then so long as that isn't happening, then yeah, there is no discrepancy there. We want to make sure that we, as far as possible, make whatever we do in this world favorable to our bhakti. So anytime we see something is unfavorable to it, our moral compass, being the principles of Sharanagati, such as Anukuyena Sankalpa, Pratikuyena Varjana, accepting that what is favorable, rejecting what is unfavorable. That is our moral compass. So using that as our moral compass, if we shall discover something is not favorable to our bhajan, then we may adjust ourselves accordingly if we are serious about our bhakti. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have some understanding. I hope that's okay.
Thank you for that.
Athena has something.
Hi, Krishna JJP, Danvat Pranams. My good fortune to hear you twice this morning, or soon to be twice this morning. I have 2 questions. And my first one is, I want to check my understanding. Going back to the very beginning of your class, you just touched upon, again, the whole, and if we take, we must give back. And that's usually in the form of sacrifice or yagya. So to check for us today, if one were to merely offer their food to Krishna, again, taking the food grains, but offering to Krishna, the supreme, even versus even the demigods, is that form of sacrifice good enough? Even if one does not chant, does not do anything else, but offers the food back to Krishna, does that cover it? Or is it that because this in Kali Yuga, it's the Sankirtan Yagya, and if one chants, but does not say offer food, but just merely chants the holy name, that is enough for the Yagya to be covered? Or we know that we can perform any one of the 9 angas. And you brought up the Srimad Bhagavatam verse that if one just glorifies, remembers, hears, worships the Lord, if one were to perform any of the other angas and say didn't chant, does that also cover because it pleases the Supreme Lord? So can you clarify that exactly, how without using forma yagya, any one of these 3, are they okay, or can you touch upon those 3 mentioned?
They're all fine. It depends on what you're trying to do for yourself and for the world around you. So you can say it is enough, because that is also true. Even the smallest offering to that reality is pleasing, and that pleases that reality is enough. You can say it like that. There is no problem there. Even as Varnashram Dharma that is mentioned there, it is meant for pleasing Hari. So you do your duties for pleasing Hari, that is also enough. It can be said like that. But in terms of the experience of Atma Suprasidati, then you may be forced to ask yourself if it is enough, right? Just like the sages in the first chapter, they've asked this thing twice actually. They want to know what is the practice, sadhana, by which they can experience Atma Suprasidati, the satisfaction of their soul, or the satisfaction of their mind and intelligence. Acharya is also saying that. So you may do something which is considered, quote, enough as far as meeting a certain parameter. You know, you have a certain duty and you've met that particular duty. But then you may be forced to ask yourself the question, is it enough in terms of the actual experience of satisfaction of the heart? At that time, you may be forced to investigate what really is enough. If you're doing those things and your heart is not satisfied, then you'll be forced to do more, or to figure out what more needs to go on in order for me to experience that Atma Suprasidati. So the answer is both a yes and a no. It's a yes because you've met certain parameters, but it's a no because Bhakti Pareshon Bhavo Viraktir Anyatra Taisha Trika Ekakala Prapadyamanasha Yatashna Tashus Tushti Pushti Shura Payonughasam. So Srimad Bhagavatam is saying if you do, well, one experiences devotion, God, and detachment from matter in the same way that one experiences nourishment, satisfaction, and freedom from hunger. But to the degree they're accepting it, prapadin manashi yatashnatashrus. So if you eat a little bit of grain, then you get a little bit of satisfaction, a little bit of nourishment, a little freedom from hunger. And if you eat full grain, full plate, then you get full nourishment, satisfaction, and complete freedom from hunger. So same with bhakti. If you do little, you get a little bit experience of devotion, God, and freedom from matter. Which means that since there's only a little freedom from these things, there will be still so many parts that are agitated inside the mind, the intellect, you can say one's very soul. But if you do it fully, completely, then you'll experience full satisfaction, etc. Full devotion, full experience of God, and full freedom from matter. So it is not enough until you have that Atma Suprasidati. And it is enough insofar as you've been able to satisfy certain parameters. It's just like chanting your 16 rounds. You can chant your 16 rounds just to hit the number, and then it's enough. You can say, I did my duty, I hit the number. But in terms of how you actually feel about it or the satisfaction you get from it, then you may say that actually this is not enough. Why am I not feeling satisfied? Why after chanting japa I must take shelter of, whatever, Netflix or Prajalpa criticizing and so on. So then you will be forced to go deeper. Your own need for full satisfaction will oblige you to go deeper or ask deeper. It's more than just hitting parameters. It's the experience of bliss that the soul is after.
Thank you so much. My second question was regarding Shukadeva Goswami and Vyasadeva. We understand that the girls did not cover up because Shukadeva Goswami was Brahman realized. However, Vyasadeva, being a Shaktivesha avatar, is a pure devotee, which is even higher than, say, Brahman realized. And even being a pure devotee, one is automatically, Brahman Bhuta is already covered. So therefore, they were, in one sense, I don't say on the same platform, you would argue that Vyasadeva is of a higher platform in one sense, but Brahman realized is already covered. But the girls had to cover up then. Is it merely because of his varnashram?
Yes,
Role that
he was playing as a grihasta, so that means he made distinction between man and woman. So they were reciprocating with that mind. Well, you see difference between man and woman. So you see that we are young girls bathing naked, so we will cover ourselves. Modesty. But this Brahmin realized boy not seeing that distinction. So there was no need in his case.
Thank you. Okay, so it wasn't that Vyasadeva wasn't qualified in any way. It was just the role that he was playing in society,
Yes.
which barred. Okay, thank you so much. Hare Krishna.